Welcome to the Daily Conversation. Let's talk first about a story we've been following for the past 6 weeks or so.
After weeks of well-organized protests by the Ukrainian people over President Yanukovych's surprise decision to accept a multi-billion-dollar payment from Vladimir Putin to join the Russian-backed Eurasian Economic Bloc instead of the European Union, as he had previously promised, new laws passed by the regime designed to stiffen penalties for protesters have backfired and rekindled outrage among the people, sending an estimated 100,000 back into Kiev's center square. Yanukovych is losing his grip on power as his chief of staff resigned over the new laws. News today is that the defiant president and the leaders of the opposition have finally sat down to negotiate. This story matters because Ukraine is the most populous state in the former Soviet bloc, like Egypt is in the Middle East. And we all saw how Egypt's been the epicenter of the recent push for change, away from the political culture of dictatorship in that region. So if the Ukrainian people can also push out their leader and turn more towards the West, the result could have a rippling effect throughout the former Soviet bloc, and that includes Russia itself.
The uprising against the Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad will also be center stage this week, as negotiations to form a new power-sharing government that officially includes the opposition begin in Geneva. More than 30 countries are coming together to try and end the civil war there. But on the eve of the gathering, there's an ongoing debate about whether Iran, who's kind of the elephant in the room, should be included at all. UN leader Ban Ki-moon officially invited them to participate, then rescinded the offer after the idea of including Iran at the negotiating table caused a lot of problems because the Iranian government has been funding and sending militants to fight for Assad and rejected the idea of forming a transitional government, making countries like the US and Saudi Arabia very skeptical of Iran's desire to make peace. Even though he ultimately bowed to the pressure and rescinded the offer, Ban Ki-moon still deserves a lot of praise here for trying to include Iran at all, because it would have put a lot of pressure on them to make their position on the situation clear to the international community, and would have eliminated their ability to hide behind the excuse that they weren't part of a final deal.
The simple possibility that Iran could be included is also a credit to President Hassan Rouhani and the recent progress he has made with the West over resolving Iran's nuclear program. Here in the United States, we are commemorating the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a man who inspired many around the world to struggle for justice and human rights. A long-lost audio tape has been discovered of a speech King made commemorating the 100-year anniversary of the Civil War. These words have not been heard in over 50 years.
So I close by quoting the words of an old Negro slave preacher who didn't quite have his grammar right, but uttered words of great symbolic profundity. They were uttered in the form of a prayer. Lord, we ain't what we ought to be. We ain't what we want to be. We ain't what we gonna be. But thank God, we ain't what we was.
One man who's walking in the shoes of Dr. King is Barack Obama. The president made his most interesting comments yet on marijuana during an interview with the New Yorker's David Remnick. As has been well documented, I smoked pot as a kid, and I view it as a bad habit and a vice, not very different from the cigarettes that I smoked as a young person up through a big chunk of my adult life, Obama said. I don't think it's more dangerous than alcohol. And he actually said that he thought it was less dangerous in terms of its impact on the individual consumer, but emphasized that it's not something I encourage. The president also showed concern with the disproportionate number of arrests for marijuana possession among minorities. Middle-class kids don't get locked up for smoking pot, and poor kids do, he said, adding that individual users shouldn't be locked up for long stretches of jail time. Obama expressed some support for legalization of marijuana in Colorado and Washington, saying it's important for it to go forward, while warning that legalization is going to be a challenge because when it comes to harder drugs, the harm done to the user is profound, and the social costs are profound, and you do start getting into some difficult line-drawing issues. If marijuana is fully legalized, and at some point folks say, well, we can come up with a negotiated dose of cocaine that we can show is not any more harmful than vodka, are we open to that? If someone says, we've got a finely calibrated dose of meth, it isn't going to kill you or rot your teeth, are we okay with that?
A lot of marijuana users believe in the healing effects of pot, but its ability to help diabetes patients is unknown. Google is tackling the growing diabetes problem, which now affects 1 in every 19 people on the planet, by developing a contact lens with a tiny chip sensor which can monitor the glucose levels in the wearer's tears. The project is still in a very early phase, but it's far enough along to make one wonder what else a contact lens could monitor, like someone's high blood pressure, for example. So with Project Glass and now this, Google is definitely trying to mold the future of eyewear to be for more than just helping us see clearly.
NASA's in the business of helping humanity as a whole see our entire world more clearly, as they were at it again with this movie of temperature observations from their atmospheric infrared sounder instrument on NASA's Aqua spacecraft, depicting the polar vortex, where cold air moved south out of the Arctic to cover much of the North American continent in a blanket of frigid temperatures.
What was unusual here, obviously, is that the jet moved so far southward and brought with it that air. As cold air moved south, it broke records throughout the eastern United States as much as 40 degrees below normal, and cold air extended as far as the normally warm Gulf of Mexico and northern Florida.
This year's Super Bowl may be the coldest in a long time, as it will be played outdoors in New Jersey's MetLife Stadium between the Denver Broncos and Seattle Seahawks. A lot of talk today, and in the next 2 weeks leading up to the biggest day in American sports, is surrounding the behavior of Seahawks defensive back Richard Sherman, or as I like to call him, Dick. After making an athletic play to seal the Seahawks' victory, Sherman immediately ran over to dejected 49ers receiver Michael Crabtree and began taunting him. Then came this post-game interview that was an extremely classless, arrogant, and unsportsmanlike moment.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're going to get. Don't you ever talk about me.
Who was talking about you?
Crabtree, don't you open your mouth about the best. Or I'm going to shut it for you real quick.
Sure, Sherman was pumped up after securing a Super Bowl appearance for his team, but this ugly, thoughtless moment should serve as a reminder to athletes everywhere to remain humble in victory. I know I'll be less inclined to cheer for the Seahawks after that, but we want to know what you think. Who will you be rooting for to take home this year's Vince Lombardi trophy? Thanks for watching the Daily Conversation. We are Brendan and Bryce, the Plank Brothers.